I'll leave you after Jason's wedding. I've already decided. Those words hung in the air of our kitchen like a toxic cloud. My husband of 31 years delivered this statement while buttering his toast, as casually as if he were commenting on the weather forecast. I remember the sunlight streaming through our bay windows, illuminating the dust particles between us, much like our marriage, suspended in animation, neither here nor there. I stared at his familiar profile, the profile I'd woken up to for over 3 decades, and felt my coffee cup trembling slightly in my hand. Not from shock, surprisingly, but from a strange bubbling sensation that I couldn't immediately identify. "Did you hear what I said, Margaret?" he asked, still not looking up from his meticulous butter spreading. "I heard you perfectly, Richard." I took a deliberate sip of my coffee. "You're planning to abandon your wife of 31 years after our only son's wedding, which is in exactly 3 months, by the way. How thoughtful of you to give me advance notice." That's when he finally looked up, clearly surprised by my calm reaction. He expected tears, hysteria, or begging. The bewilderment in his eyes almost made me laugh. "You're not upset?" he asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. I set my cup down carefully. "I'm processing. May I ask why? Or who?" Richard cleared his throat, uncomfortable with my composure. "It's not who you think. It's not about another woman." "I didn't say it was," I replied, though of course that had been my first thought. "It's about me. I've been unhappy for years. You must have noticed." Had I noticed? Of course I had. The separate vacations, the silent dinners, the way he'd flinch when I touched him. But I'd attributed it to the midlife crisis that never seemed to end, to his stressful job as a corporate attorney, to the empty nest syndrome after Jason left for college. I had given him space, thinking it would pass. "You've been planning this for how long?" I asked, that strange feeling still bubbling inside me. "About 2 years," he admitted, having the decency to look slightly ashamed. "I wanted to wait until Jason was settled in life. The wedding seemed like a natural transition point. 2 years, 730 days of planning his escape while sharing a bed with me. 730 breakfasts across from a woman he couldn't wait to leave. You know what's ironic, Richard?" I said, finally identifying that bubbling sensation as something between hysterical amusement and cold fury. "I've spent 31 years making excuses for your emotional absence, 31 years convincing myself that your withdrawal was temporary, and now you sit here, telling me with perfect clarity that you've been methodically planning your exit for 2 years. His jaw tightened. "I'm trying to be honest with you. Now? Now you choose honesty?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What about the vacation home in Vermont? The one we just renovated? Was that part of your master plan too?" He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I thought we could sell it and split the proceeds." "How generous of you," I replied, the acid in my tone unmistakable. "And what about retirement? Our shared accounts? The business ventures we're both invested in? Have you plotted that all out too?" "Margaret, be reasonable. We can work through the logistics." "Reasonable?" I interrupted, my voice rising slightly. "You've been lying to my face for 2 years, actually, probably much longer. And now you expect me to be reasonable?" I stood up suddenly, needing to move, to breathe. The kitchen felt too small, too familiar, too much like a stage set where I'd been performing in a play without knowing the real script. "You know what's truly devastating, Richard?" I said, turning to face him fully. "It's not that you want to leave. It's that you've been gone for years. And I've been here alone, talking to a ghost, sleeping next to a stranger, planning a future with someone who was already halfway out the door." Something flickered in his eyes, guilt, perhaps, or surprise at my insight. For a moment, just a moment, I thought he might reconsider, might recognize what he was throwing away. But then he hardened again. "I'm sorry you see it that way, but my mind is made up. 3 months, I repeated. "You'll stay until after Jason's wedding, and then you'll go." He nodded, seemingly relieved that I was accepting his terms. "All right," I said, a strange calm settling over me. "Then we have 3 months to prepare." "Prepare for what?" he asked, wariness creeping back into his voice. I smiled, and for the first time in years I felt truly awake. For the next chapter, Richard. For whatever comes next. He couldn't have known then what those words meant. He couldn't have imagined what I was already planning in the quiet recesses of my mind. After all, he'd spent so many years underestimating me. Why would today be any different? I'm going for a walk, I announced, already heading for the door. Don't wait up. I stepped outside into the spring air and drew a deep breath. 3 months until my son's wedding. 3 months until my husband's planned departure. 3 months to execute the perfect response to his betrayal. Looking back, I should have recognized the signs years earlier. The way Richard grew increasingly critical of everything I did, my cooking, my appearance, my opinions. The unexplained late nights at the office that gradually became our new normal. The separate bedrooms that he justified with complaints about my disruptive sleep patterns. The gradual erosion of my self-confidence under his constant, subtle criticism. Do you really think that dress is appropriate for your age? He'd ask when we were heading to a company event. Your investment ideas are a bit naive, Margaret, he'd say dismissively during financial discussions. Despite my business degree and years of successful personal investing, Jason gets his intelligence from my side of the family, he'd comment casually to friends, as if I weren't standing right there, as if I hadn't been the one helping our son with homework every night while Richard worked late. It wasn't just Richard. His mother, Beatrice, had been undermining me from the beginning. A career woman isn't what Richard needs, she'd told me directly after we announced our engagement. He needs someone who will put his needs first. Even after 3 decades, she still introduced me as Richard's wife, rather than by my name. When Jason was born, I'd scaled back my career as a marketing executive to be more present for our family. Richard had promised it would be temporary, that we were a team. But temporary became permanent, and team became hierarchy, with Richard at the top, making decisions and dismissing my input. You don't understand the complexities, he'd say patronizingly. Your world has become rather small. My world had become small because he had systematically made it so. Friends I'd once been close to gradually disappeared from our social calendar because Richard found them tiresome or beneath us. Family gatherings with my relatives became increasingly rare because there was always some reason why we couldn't attend, a business emergency, a conflict with his schedule. I'd been isolated, diminished, and conditioned to accept my reduced role. And still, I persisted in believing we had a partnership. 2 weeks after Richard's breakfast announcement, I discovered the real depth of his betrayal. I was organizing files in our home office, something Richard had always discouraged me from doing, when I found a folder hidden behind others in the filing cabinet. Inside were documents for a corporation I'd never heard of, Avalon Holdings, LLC. My curiosity piqued. I dug deeper. What I found made my blood run cold. Richard had been systematically transferring our joint assets into this separate entity for years. Our vacation property wasn't in both our names as I'd believed. It had been transferred to Avalon Holdings. The same was true for several investment accounts I thought we jointly owned. I sat there, documents spread across the desk, feeling as if I'd been punched in the stomach. This wasn't just about Richard wanting to leave me. This was calculated financial betrayal. With shaking hands, I photographed every document before returning them exactly as I'd found them. Then I called the one person I knew I could trust, my old college roommate, Elaine, who had become a forensic accountant. I need your help, I said when she answered. And I need absolute discretion. Elaine and I met at a cafe 2 towns over, where I showed her the photos I'd taken. This is elaborate, she said, scrolling through the images on my tablet. He's been planning this for at least 5 years, not 2. And Margaret, she looked up at me, her expression grave. If you hadn't found this, you would have been left with almost nothing. How is this even legal? I whispered. It's in a gray area, she replied. Some of it might not be legal at all, especially if he forged your signature on any transfers, which, from what I'm seeing, is highly possible. I felt sick. 5 years. 5 years of calculated deception while I made his favorite meals, supported his career, maintained our home, and planned our supposed future together. What should I do? I asked. Elaine looked at me carefully. What do you want to do? It was a simple question, but one I hadn't been asked in a very long time. What did I want? I want what's rightfully mine, I said slowly. And I want him to regret ever underestimating me. That night, I maintained my usual routine. I prepared Richard's favorite roast chicken dinner. I asked about his day. I mentioned that Jason had called about wedding details. Not once did I let on that I knew the truth. As I watched Richard eat the meal I'd prepared, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me, I realized something fundamental had changed. The last lingering threads of love I'd been clinging to had finally snapped. In their place was something new, a cold, clear purpose. I gave everything to them, and they tossed me aside like I was nothing. I whispered to myself later that night, alone in my bathroom. The woman in the mirror looked different somehow, harder, more focused. That was the night I stopped being Richard's dutiful wife and became the architect of his downfall. I'd been a fool for years, but I wouldn't be a victim. Richard wanted to wait until after Jason's wedding to leave me with nothing? Fine. I would use those 3 months to prepare a response he would never forget. The next morning, I smiled at Richard over breakfast and asked if he'd like me to pick up his dry cleaning. He seemed pleased by my apparent acceptance of our situation. I always knew you were practical, Margaret, he said, patting my hand condescendingly. If only he knew just how practical I was about to become. I'd always been good at multitasking, a skill Richard consistently undervalued. Now, I was operating on 2 parallel tracks. Outwardly, the supportive mother helping with wedding preparations, and the acquiescent wife accepting her fate. Inwardly, the strategist methodically dismantling Richard's carefully constructed exit plan. My first call was to an attorney, not anyone from Richard's social circle, but a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Diana Levinson from a competing firm, recommended by Elaine. I met her in a private conference room, bringing copies of everything I'd discovered. Your husband has been very thorough, Diana observed, reviewing the documents. But he's made mistakes. Overconfidence leads to carelessness. What kind of mistakes? I asked. For one, several of these transfers required your signature. If you didn't sign them, I didn't. Then we have fraud, she said, a small, satisfied smile playing at her lips. And I'm particularly interested in this offshore account in the Cayman Islands. It appears he's been filtering money through his firm's client accounts first, then to Avalon Holdings, and finally offshore. That's not just fraud against you, that's potentially embezzlement from his firm. My stomach dropped. Could he go to prison? Diana looked at me directly. Do you care? The question hit me like a splash of cold water. Did I care? After 3 decades of emotional manipulation, after discovering he'd been systematically stealing what we'd built together, after learning he'd planned to leave me financially devastated, did I care if Richard faced legal consequences? I care about our son, I answered finally. I don't want to ruin Jason's wedding or tarnish his relationship with his father. Beyond that, I want justice, not revenge. Diana nodded. Then we'll proceed carefully. We need to document everything without alerting Richard. And we need to secure your financial position before he realizes you know. Thus began my covert operation. I created a new email account and a separate phone line for communications with Diana and Elaine. I scheduled our meetings during times Richard believed I was at yoga class or having lunch with friends he'd long ago stopped caring about. Meanwhile, I continued helping with wedding preparations. Jason and his fiancée Emma had chosen a beautiful vineyard venue, and there were countless details to manage. Richard, true to form, participated minimally, offering only critical comments about costs or logistics. "Mom, is everything okay between you and Dad?" Jason asked me one afternoon as we sampled cake options. "He seems distant." I squeezed his hand. "Your father and I are going through some adjustments, but please don't worry. This time is about you and Emma. We'll figure out our stuff." I hated lying to my son, but I wouldn't let Richard's betrayal cast a shadow over Jason's happiness. There would be time for truth after the wedding. As weeks passed, my team grew. Diana brought in a forensic financial investigator who uncovered even more than Elaine had initially found. Richard hadn't just been hiding our marital assets. He'd been conducting questionable financial maneuvers through his law firm for years. "He's been skimming from client trust accounts," the investigator explained, showing me documentation. Small amounts from multiple accounts, transferred briefly through Avalon Holdings before being returned, minus a percentage that went to his offshore account. His partners don't know? I asked. Apparently not. He's the managing partner for the trust division. He approves his own transactions. This was bigger than I'd imagined. Richard wasn't just planning to leave me. He was a criminal. I also discovered something that initially confused me. Richard had been making regular monthly payments to a luxury apartment complex for over a year. Was this where he planned to live after leaving me? It seemed excessive for a bachelor pad. I decided to visit the complex myself, using the pretext of looking for investment properties. The leasing agent was happy to show me around, including their model units. This particular floor plan is quite popular with our executive clients, she said, showing me an elegantly appointed 2-bedroom unit. Do you happen to know if a Richard Caldwell has looked at these units? I asked casually. He's a business associate considering a move here. Her smile froze slightly. Mr. Caldwell already has a unit here, on the penthouse floor. He and Ms. Winters have been residents for about a year now. There it was, the final piece. Despite his claim that it's not about another woman, Richard had been living a double life with someone named Winters. I thanked the agent and left, my mind racing. Back in my car, I did a quick search on my phone for anyone named Winters connected to Richard's firm. It took only moments to find her. Vanessa Winters, 29 years old, a junior partner in Richard's department, 30 years younger than him. Of course, that night I cooked Richard's favorite steak dinner. As we ate, I marveled at his composure, at his ability to sit across from me discussing mundane matters while maintaining such elaborate deceptions. You seem different lately, he commented, studying me over his wine glass. More, I don't know, serene somehow. I smiled. Do I? I suppose I'm just focused on making Jason's wedding perfect. And you're really accepting of our arrangement? After the wedding? We've had 31 years together, Richard, I said, meeting his gaze steadily. Nothing lasts forever. He looked relieved and slightly disappointed. Had he wanted drama? Tears? Begging? I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Later, alone in my study, I updated Diana on my discoveries. Her response was immediate. This changes things. The apartment, the girlfriend. It establishes a pattern of deception that strengthens our case considerably. 2 months had passed since Richard's breakfast announcement. Only 1 month remained until Jason's wedding. My plan was nearly complete. All the documentation gathered, all the legal preparations in place. I had secured my own separate bank accounts and safety net, but I still hadn't decided exactly when and how to confront Richard. Diana advised waiting until after the wedding, as I'd originally planned. Let him think he's won, she said. The surprise will be that much sweeter. I agreed, but with one modification. Richard wouldn't be leaving me after Jason's wedding. I would be leaving him, but not before ensuring he faced the consequences of his actions. As the wedding approached, I felt a strange calm. For years, I'd been reactive, responding to Richard's manipulation and control. Now, I was 10 steps ahead, and he had no idea what was coming. Jason and Emma's wedding day dawned perfect. Clear blue skies, mild temperature, the vineyard lush and green. I'd been up since dawn, helping with final arrangements, checking details, and ensuring everything was perfect for my son's special day. Richard played his part well. The proud father, the successful attorney, the loving husband. He kept his hand at the small of my back during photos, smiled appropriately during the ceremony, and gave a touching toast at the reception that brought tears to many eyes, including mine, though for entirely different reasons. To lasting love, he concluded, raising his glass while looking directly at me, a private smirk playing at the corner of his mouth that only I could recognize. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here he was, toasting to lasting love while planning to abandon his marriage of 3 decades. Here he was, playing the devoted father while secretly embezzling funds that would have been part of his son's inheritance. Here he was, the respected attorney, breaking laws and violating ethics. As the reception continued, I excused myself to freshen up. In the bridal suite, I checked my phone to find a message from Diana. All set for tomorrow. 9 a.m. Tomorrow. The day Richard had planned to tell me he was leaving. The day after our son's wedding, just as he'd planned for 2 years. Or rather, 5 years, as I'd discovered. How fitting that it would also be the day his carefully constructed house of cards would come crashing down. I rejoined the reception, accepting compliments on the beautiful wedding, dancing with my son, and even sharing one dance with Richard. As we moved across the floor, he leaned in close. "You've handled all this with surprising grace," he murmured. "I'm impressed, Margaret." "Thank you," I replied simply. "I've always been good at planning events." "I hope we can keep things civil tomorrow," he continued. "I've arranged for a mediator to help us begin discussing the separation details." I smiled. "I've made some arrangements of my own." He frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "You'll see tomorrow," I said lightly. "Let's not spoil today with tomorrow's business." His frown deepened, but the music ended and we were separated by well-wishers. For the rest of the evening, I caught him watching me with newfound wariness. Good. Let him worry. As the night wound down and Jason and Emma departed for their honeymoon amid a shower of rose petals, Richard and I returned home in silence. Once inside, he poured himself a scotch and turned to me. "About tomorrow." "I'm quite tired, Richard," I interrupted. "It's been a long, emotional day. Let's talk in the morning." Before he could protest, I headed upstairs to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. Something I'd started doing since his announcement 3 months ago. The next morning, I was up early, dressed in a tailored navy suit that I knew conveyed both confidence and authority. Richard emerged from his bedroom looking similarly prepared for battle, his expression determined. "Margaret, I've asked James Wilson to join us," he said over coffee, referring to his firm's senior partner. "He's agreed to mediate our initial separation discussion." "That's fine," I replied calmly. "I've invited some people as well." His eyes narrowed. "Who?" The doorbell rang at that moment. "Why don't we find out?" I suggested, moving to answer it. Richard's face registered pure shock when Diana Levinson walked in, followed by 2 men in suits, one I recognized as the financial investigator, the other a stranger. "Richard Caldwell?" the stranger asked, his tone professional but cold. "I'm Special Agent Carter, FBI. We have some questions about certain financial irregularities connected to your firm's trust accounts." Richard went pale. "What is this?" he demanded, looking from the agent to me. "Margaret, what have you done?" "She's protected herself," Diana answered for me, and in the process uncovered some very interesting financial activities that the Bureau found concerning. "This is absurd," Richard sputtered. "James will be here any minute." "James Wilson won't be joining us," I said quietly. "He's currently meeting with the other partners at your firm, reviewing the documentation I provided regarding Avalon Holdings and your offshore accounts." Richard staggered slightly, reaching for the counter to steady himself. "You can't prove anything." The financial investigator stepped forward, placing a thick folder on the kitchen island. "Actually, we can prove quite a lot, Mr. Caldwell. Would you like to start with the forged signatures on asset transfers, or the systematic embezzlement from client trust accounts?" As if on cue, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was Vanessa Winters, looking confused and slightly alarmed. "Richard," she called, stepping inside before noticing our gathering. "What's going on? You said to meet you here to talk to your wife about—" She stopped abruptly, taking in the scene. "About leaving me for you?" I finished for her. "Yes, he mentioned that plan 3 months ago, though he failed to mention you by name, or the apartment you've been sharing for over a year." Richard's face contorted with fury. "You've been investigating me? Spying on me?" "I've been protecting myself," I corrected calmly. "Something I should have done years ago." What followed was both awful and strangely satisfying. Agent Carter formally informed Richard that he was under investigation for financial fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. Diana presented him with divorce papers citing fraud, adultery, and financial misconduct. The financial investigator detailed how we had traced every illicit transaction back to accounts directly controlled by Richard. Vanessa, realizing the extent of trouble Richard was in, backed toward the door. "I had no idea about any financial improprieties," she said quickly. "I need to consult with my own attorney." "Vanessa, wait," Richard called, But she was already gone, the door slamming behind her. Left alone with his crumbling world, Richard did what he'd always done when cornered. He attacked. "You vindictive witch," he hissed at me. "You've been planning this all along, haven't you? Waiting for the perfect moment to humiliate me." I let his words wash over me without reaction. "No, Richard, you planned this. You planned to leave me financially devastated after using me for 31 years. You planned to abandon me the day after our son's wedding. You planned to start a new life with your girlfriend using money you stole. From me, from your clients, from your partners? I simply discovered your plan and created a better one." Diana touched my arm gently. "We should go. The movers will be here in an hour for your things." Richard's head snapped up. "Movers? What movers?" "I'm leaving you, Richard," I said, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders as I spoke the words. "The house is being seized as part of the fraud investigation anyway. I've purchased a new place closer to Jason." "You can't do this," he whispered, but the fight was draining from him as reality set in. "I already have," I replied. "Oh, and Richard, I've invited your partners and the Bar Association Ethics Committee to meet us at your office this afternoon." I thought they deserved to hear the full story directly. As we prepared to leave, Richard slumped into a kitchen chair, suddenly looking every one of his 63 years. "Why now?" he asked hoarsely. "Why not confront me when you first found out?" I paused at the door and looked back at the man I'd spent most of my adult life with, the man who had planned to discard me like an outdated appliance. "Because you wanted to wait until after Jason's wedding," I answered simply. "And unlike you, I keep my promises." 6 months after that fateful morning in my kitchen, I sat on the deck of my new lakefront home, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. So much had changed, all of it, surprisingly, for the better. Richard's fall had been swift and complete. The FBI investigation had uncovered far more extensive financial crimes than even I had discovered. His firm had immediately severed all ties with him, reclaiming his partnership stake to help cover client restitution. The Bar Association had suspended his license pending criminal proceedings. Most of his so-called friends had disappeared, unwilling to associate with a disgraced attorney facing potential prison time. Vanessa had vanished from his life within hours of that morning confrontation. According to mutual acquaintances, she'd quickly secured a position at a firm in Chicago, distancing herself both professionally and geographically from the scandal. As for me, the divorce had been finalized in record time, with the court awarding me significant compensation from what remained of Richard's personal assets after the criminal seizures. Diana had been masterful, ensuring that my innocence in his financial schemes was thoroughly documented while establishing my right to equitable division of our legitimate marital property. More importantly, I had reclaimed my life. I'd reconnected with old friends Richard had subtly pushed away. I'd re-established my marketing consultancy, discovering that my skills were still very much in demand. I'd even started dating. Nothing serious, just enjoyable dinners and conversations with men who actually listened when I spoke. The most difficult part had been telling Jason the truth. I'd waited until he and Emma returned from their honeymoon, then invited them to my new home for dinner. The conversation had been painful, but necessary. "Why didn't you tell me before the wedding?" Jason had asked, struggling to reconcile the father he thought he knew with the man revealed by the investigation. "Because that day was about you and Emma, not about your father's mistakes or my response to them," I'd answered honestly. "I wanted you to have your perfect day." Jason had been angry at first, at his father primarily, but also at me for the timing of my actions. Eventually, though, understanding had come. He still maintained contact with Richard, visiting him occasionally as he awaited trial, but our relationship had deepened through the crisis. Jason had seen, perhaps for the first time, that I was more than just his mother. I was a woman of strength and resilience. The ringing of my phone interrupted my sunset reverie. It was Elaine. "Just checking in," she said when I answered. "How are you holding up?" "Surprisingly well," I replied. "The consulting business is taking off. The house feels like home, and I'm sleeping better than I have in years." "And the Richard situation? Any updates?" I sighed. "His attorneys are still negotiating with prosecutors. Sounds like they're close to a plea deal, Probably 5 years with possibility of parole after 3, plus financial restitution. How do you feel about that? It was a question I'd been asking myself lately. The anger that had fueled me through those initial months had gradually subsided, replaced by something quieter. Not exactly forgiveness, but a kind of detached compassion. I feel free, I answered finally. Whatever happens to Richard is between him and the justice system now. I've moved on. After we hung up, I remained on the deck, watching darkness settle over the lake. A loon called somewhere in the distance, its haunting cry echoing across the water. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, anxious to please, chronically uncertain, always seeking Richard's approval while never quite earning it. That woman seemed like a stranger now, a character in someone else's story. My phone buzzed with a text message from a man I'd been seeing occasionally, a widowed professor with kind eyes and a quick wit. Dinner tomorrow? That new Italian place just opened. I smiled as I typed my reply. Looking forward to it. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me appeared younger somehow, more vital, her eyes clear and direct. There were still lines of experience around those eyes, silver threads in her hair, evidence of a life fully lived, with all its joys and sorrows. But there was something else there too, a quiet confidence, a hard-won wisdom. You underestimated me, I whispered to Richard's ghost in my mind. That was your first mistake, and your last. I switched off the light and walked to my bedroom alone, in my house, bought with my money, decorated to my taste. Tomorrow would bring new clients, new conversations, new possibilities. The past was finally where it belonged, behind me. Some marriages end in happily ever after. Mine ended in something better: freedom, strength, and the sweet satisfaction of just